Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, after examining the ethical implications, the World Health Organization approves the use of experimental drugs in the fight against West Africa's Ebola epidemic. This as the death toll tops 1,000. Also, the UN urges governments not to panic, but calls for the global response to the deadly outbreak to be ramped up. Teams on the ground in the worst affected areas are struggling to cope with limited resources. We hear from our correspondent in Liberia. And as Tripoli's police chief is assassinated, Libya's lawmakers vote to hold direct elections for the country's interim president. But it's a plan that's likely to spark more turmoil in the troubled nation. First up, Guinea-Bissau's closed its borders with Guinea-Conakry, which, along with Liberia and Sierra Leone, is at the centre of an Ebola epidemic that has now claimed 1,013 lives. A Spanish priest has today become the first European to succumb to the disease after contracting it in Liberia. He'd been treated with experimental treatment ZMapp, which appears to have helped the recovery of 2 US doctors. On Tuesday, the World Health Organization authorized using such medication and hopes to fast-track clinical trials and production of unproven drugs. The body is warned, though, that existing serums are in short supply and should not give false hope that Ebola can be treated easily now.
In the special circumstances of this Ebola outbreak, it is ethical to offer unregistered interventions as potential treatments or prevention. There are caveats, though. The panel said ethical criteria must always guide the provision of such intervention. These include transparency about all aspects of care, informed consent, freedom of choice, confidentiality, respect for person and preservation of dignity, and with the involvement of the community.
Well, the WHO has still stressed the importance of infection prevention and control. The UN stepping up the global response to the West African crisis as health workers on the front lines struggle with limited resources, fatigue, and communities too frightened to report potential cases. Katerina Vitozzi sent us this report from northern Liberia.
On the move with Lofa County's Ebola contact tracing team. This group of Liberian Red Cross staff and volunteers has tracked down the whereabouts of a woman whose life could be in danger. Mame Kone's husband and son both died from Ebola within weeks of each other. The team want to check she too isn't displaying symptoms of the contagious virus. But Mame's been hard to find, and now she doesn't want to talk.
They feel that when we come to their houses, we are going to report that all of them are Ebola patients. That is the notion they are carrying. And some of them, when they see us, we start to talk to them, they begin to cry.
Mame's not alone in her fear. Vonjama City in Lofa County is one of Liberia's worst hit Ebola areas. The virus has killed more than 19 people here. New cases are reported daily. But despite that, the county's largest general hospital is eerily quiet. It's taken months of public messaging to get people even to admit Ebola exists.
There are all kinds of theories or all kinds of schools of thought come about and say, oh, well, people are taking people's kidneys and people are taking blood and we're spraying people to die. But now we have graduated from that. People have come to accept it, that yes, it is indeed Ebola.
But although the acceptance is coming, Liberia's new infection rate isn't dropping. This is Foya, northern Liberia's biggest Ebola case management centre. Aid organisation Médecins Sans Frontières funds it. Urgent buildings underway to make more room for the growing number of sick.
We have been crying, asking the international community to really come in to support the centre, to support the Ebola fight in Liberia, because the government all alone cannot do it.
Capacity isn't the only challenge. The Liberian government is calling on international partners to help provide frontline medical staff, logistical support and disease control experts to help contain and beat this epidemic.
Well, Libyan MPs have agreed to hold direct elections for the troubled country's interim president. There had been fears that allowing lawmakers to choose would open up the process to corruption amidst the deep political instability and rivalries that have plagued Libya since the end of the 2011 revolution. The standoff between liberal and pro-Islamist factions have sparked violent clashes and a spate of assassinations and abduction. Today, Tripoli's police chief was killed by unknown attackers in the city. Well, for more on Libya, I'm joined now by Valerie Stoker, who's an author and consultant on Libyan affairs. Thanks very much for coming in to speak to us. Now, Valerie, after Gaddafi was ousted, there was a lot of hope that there would be a new dawn of democracy for Libya, but it looks like they've made a bit of a hash of it. You don't think that there's much to be optimistic about over lawmakers' decision today to hold direct presidential elections. Why is that?
Well, the thing is about this decision that it does not reflect the general opinion in Libya, and it does not represent the entire political scene. The parliament that has convened for the first time in Tobruk last week, and that replaced the General National Council, is in fact dominated by pro-liberal forces, as the Islamist factions boycotted the inauguration in Tobruk. So, from that, looking at it from that point of view, there really isn't much. There isn't much improvement to hope for, because the political standoff will be further. The political standoff will be further.
This will just deepen the political
exactly,
standoff.
Yes.
So how did lawmakers in a country where there's so many rivalries manage to push through this decision in the first place?
The reason why they were able to push through is precisely the fact that not all elected lawmakers attended the inaugural session, and that therefore they did not have the full. They reached the quorum, so they were able to pass the decision, but there will be plenty of opposition once the remaining lawmakers have joined the legislature.
Now, today we also saw the assassination of Colonel Mohammed al-Suisi, Tripoli's police chief. I mean, it's in the midst of a landscape where we see militia running rampant. Tripoli's airport's been the center of clashes between rival militia. The assassination, particularly of what I'm assuming is quite a high-profile figure, is that likely to further inflame these violent standoffs and incidents that we've been seeing?
Well, the assassination is definitely going to further inflame the violence, because it is perceived, or it is automatically interpreted through the lens of the Islamist liberal standoff or crisis, and the police chief who died today openly sided with the liberal camp some time ago, and so he is seen as a yet another victim of this increasingly violent political crisis.
Thanks very much, Valerie Stoker, there joining us for a closer look at Libya's current troubles. Thanks very much for coming in and joining us. In other news, the UN's warned South Sudan's warring leaders that they'd face sanctions if they don't do more to end fighting that has brought millions to the brink of famine and left thousands dead. UN delegates arrived in Juba on Tuesday to meet with President Salva Kiir and are due to meet rebel chief and former Vice President Riek Machar. Now, they've also already missed Sunday's deadline to forge a unity government, and aid workers have warned the fighting sparked a food crisis that is the worst in the world. The US has today pledged around $180 million to help feed those at risk of famine. South Africa's ex-president Thabo Mbeki has called for a boycott of Israeli goods to show solidarity with the Palestinians. Addressing students at the University of South Africa, he rejected calls for the government to recall its ambassador to Tel Aviv, but encouraged political parties, trade unions and religious groups to turn away from Israeli companies. Thousands of people, mainly Palestinians, have died in the fighting in Gaza since July. South Africa has historically supported Palestinians throughout the conflict. Now, animal rights activists have marked today out as World Elephant Day to focus on the threat the animals face from poachers. Demand for tusks across Asia means tens of thousands of animals have been slaughtered in Africa over the last few years, and they're at risk of extinction. In Nairobi, a conservation chief handed in a petition to police calling for the arrest of a Mombasa-based businessman who they say is the ivory kingpin of the country. Poaching also threatens rhino. South Africa plans on evacuating hundreds of them from the famous Kruger National Park to put them out of reach of horn smugglers. Legal killings have spiked from 13 in 2007 to 1,004 last year. Well, thanks for staying with us. That's it from me for African News. Short break now and more news and headlines from around the world coming up.